Yeah, I know. You're sick of all the M1X MacBook Pro content, but yet you clicked on this video. You know why? It's because you're a helpless little
sheep and you love it! You love the speculation! You love being told what rumor features are going to be on a product, and you love the rumor mill. Oh, you tell me in the comments that you hate it, but you just keep watching it. That's right. I know you. Because I am you! Singularity has already been achieved, and you're just a brain in a jar, so just because you cannot watch the simulations of constant MacBook Pros.
Sorry, I think I'm good now. Hey, what's going on everyone? Greg here, and listen, we're all basically impatiently waiting for the M1X Macs because at this point, it feels like they are long overdue, and even though a lot of your faith has been shaken with this, rumor mill and release dates, you have to understand that for as long as I have been doing this, trust me when I say that usually most of these rumors, especially with a range of sources reporting on these products from people like John Prosser to Mark Gurman, these tidbits that usually drop turn out to be true, even if the release date of the product was pushed back or not announced at one particular event. Guessing the release date is one of the hardest things to do with any product, which is why most leakers usually give a time frame of when that product is going to be released, not a set date. But some reporters are, let's just say, bolder than others, and they have to own that failure as well. So while you might be disappointed that we didn't get an M1X MacBook Pro at WWDC, it doesn't mean it isn't a product. Like, this isn't a myth. We know that Apple has to replace their entire Mac lineup with Apple Silicon, and they have less than a year to complete that transition. So these Macs are an inevitability at this point. However, for this video, I kind of wanted to focus on some of the math that I have been doing behind the scenes based on some of these rumors that we have been, hearing about with this powerful M1X chip and with the multiple CPU and GPU core counts that are coming to products like the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro. And I kind of want to discuss some of the recent reports of Apple ramping up certain components like mini LED displays to really give you an idea of not only what kind of performance I think these machines are going to bring, but also some speculation on what I personally think these MacBook Pros may cost, because I think these things are going to be shockingly pricey, and I'm not sure the internet is ready for it. All right, let's start with the power of the M1X MacBook Pro. So we have a lot of information on this M1X chip, and that is coming from a solid reporter, Mark Gurman. He has a great track record, especially with specific targets Apple is trying to hit with a lot of their products. So he has a lot of information on the M1X chip, and he says that Apple is working on two different versions. In his own words, he says, for the new MacBook Pros, Apple is planning two different chips, codenamed Jade C-Chop and Jade C-Die. Both include 8 high-performance cores and 2 energy-efficient cores for a total of 10 cores. But the difference here is that these two CPUs will be either offered in a 16-core GPU option or a 32-core GPU option. That's a lot of cores. So let's focus on the CPU first, because it sounds like there's going to be no difference with the CPU between the 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros and also other M1X products like the Mac Mini and the bigger redesigned iMac. First of all, if this is truly an M1X style chip, meaning that it's the same clock speed as the M1 chip just with more cores, that means that for single core performance, these M1X Macs will perform exactly the same to the current M1 Macs. The real difference here is for the pros, who can take advantage of higher multi-threaded workloads. That would include workloads like video and photo editing, music production, development, and so on. Now, I just have no idea how these Macs are going to perform thermally, but if we're just doing some back of the napkin math and assuming that double the high performance cores means double the performance for multi-core performance, you can see based on a Geekbench scoring system that the M1X chip would be a drastic improvement in multi-core performance, and we could be seeing Intel Mac Pro CPU levels of performance coming out of what could be, in the smallest form factor, a 14-inch laptop. The M1X, based on my estimates, should be some of the most powerful Macs yet, and only really beaten in performance by the highest end Intel Mac Pros. And that is insane to me. Coming from the 2016 era of MacBook Pros, which were just so thermally constrained by those Intel chips, and now if the thermals on these new M1X MacBook Pros are good, and based how great the M1 is on thermals, I have no reason to believe they wouldn't be. That means that this will be a generational leap in performance from Apple's chip design, and it is going to give Mac Pro level of performance in a portable laptop form factor that by all means should still be relatively thin and light compared to some of the bulkier gaming laptops out there. This is a huge win. Now, it's more than CPU. Let's focus on the GPU, because the GPU is always something that has been one of those things that these M1X computers were really going to have to blow us away with in terms of performance, because these are pro-level machines. And the M1 GPU, even if it was good for an integrated graphics card, it is still not nearly good enough to match dedicated levels of GPU performance, and Apple would have to target dedicated levels of GPU performance, especially for their bigger machines, like the 16-inch MacBook Pro and the 27-inch iMac. Now remember, there's two different chips that Apple is working on. The first is a 16-core GPU design. That would be double the GPU cores that are currently found on the M1. Assuming we do our same lazy math, we can see that doubling those cores could lead to performance that is getting up there with dedicated GPUs, with my estimates scoring around the performance of an AMD Radeon Pro 5500 XT. Don't forget, this is the 14-inch laptop, which will be replacing the 4-port 13-inch MacBook Pro in the lineup, and that would be a huge jump in GPU performance because those smaller MacBook Pros always used integrated Intel GPUs, and it was never a performance powerhouse for graphics. It was always weak. Now, while this 14-inch certainly wouldn't be a graphical powerhouse compared to the top-end GPUs, it would still be respectable. And honestly, it could be performant enough to have a lot of people who used to get the 16-inch model just for the better GPU going back to the smaller 14-inch form factor. As for the second rumored chip that Gurman also mentioned, it is still an M1X chip, this time with just more GPU cores, 32 of them to be exact. That is double the cores of the 16-core model we just mentioned. And assuming that Apple can take full advantage of those 32 cores, that again means a chip that would be performing above the level of the AMD Radeon Pro 5700 XT based on metal scores found in Geekbench. Mind you, that GPU is a $600 upgrade on the Mac Pro. So to get that level of GPU performance on a Mac, on a MacBook would be good. And while that might not sound too impressive given, the Macs historically have kind of been lacking in GPU power, it is a big jump up in power from where the current 16-inch MacBook Pro is. Coupled together with the efficiency of what we think this M1X will provide, these systems could be the perfect blend of CPU and GPU power, especially in those laptop form factors. Honestly, the only real shame is that Apple Silicon Macs still can't boot camp into Windows, because while I still have my doubts about these, GPUs approaching levels of like NVIDIA cards like the 3070, I think based on these numbers though, these would be some of the most competent gaming Macs that Apple has ever released. If only there was a bigger library of games to play on the Mac, or if we could boot camp into Windows. I think that's going to be the biggest tragedy of this M1X machine. Now lastly, let's talk about pricing, because I have been just sounding the horn for quite some time now that I think these M1X MacBook Pros are just going to break the bank and completely eviscerate your wallets. And this is all due to one component: the mini LED display, which recent reports says that Apple has been ramping up production in preparation for this MacBook Pro launch. So it does sound like mini LED displays are coming, and that is primarily why there has been such a delay with these MacBook Pros, because Apple can't manufacture enough of them. Don't forget, when the mini LED display was introduced on the 12.9-inch iPad Pro, the price of that iPad went up by $100. So if we take that same logic and apply it for these M1X MacBook Pros, I think we could see the same price jump occur, and the 14-inch model could start at like $1,900. And if I'm really thinking about the new design, specs, and the target audience for these laptops, I really wouldn't be shocked at this point to see a $2,000 starting price for the 14-inch model and possibly a $2,500 starting price for the 16-inch model. The only really hope I have for Apple being able to keep that, $1,799 starting price on the lower end laptop is the rumored removal of the touch bar, which is an OLED display strip on the top of the, keyboard. And that always sounded like a costly component to me, so maybe the removal of that touch bar and adding the mini LED display would balance each other out. But again, that iPad Pro increase indicates to me that you should be prepared for these MacBook Pros to be more expensive than the current models. Now, I think my logic here is pretty sound, but I know a lot of smart people watch my videos, and you guys always have insight into this stuff that I didn't even think of. So let me know in the comments below. Do you think that my, performance estimates that I put forth are realistic for the M1X chip? Or do you think they'll be lower? Or do you actually think they'll actually be higher than my estimates? Also, what do you think Apple will price these new laptops at? Do you think it's going to be the same starting price, higher, or hey, if you're hopeful, maybe even lower? And then, hey, if you like the video, give me a like. If you want to see more from the channel, obviously make sure you're subscribed. And if you want to help the channel out in any way, make sure you check out some of the links in the description. And as always, thank you so much for watching another video, and I will see you all, hopefully, in the next one. Take care, everyone.